Welcome back, Tribe. Get into it.
Yeah. I think this is going to be one of the most important memes of the coming decade. And both of us have been talking about it, at least in part, for maybe like 3 or 4 years, I think, online. But it's picking up steam. What have you learned digging deeper into the modern conception of young male syndrome and how it's sort of manifested? What have you learned?
Yeah. Well, so the young male syndrome, this constellation of traits that are associated with a certain period of time in young men's lives, typically the teens and the early 20s, heightened levels of risk-taking, reduced self-control and inhibition. If you look at rates of criminality, for example, they tend to peak at around age 19. And this is true regardless of culture and society, sort of all across the world, in non-industrialized hunter-gatherer communities, and all the way up to sort of wealthy and rich societies, that it's the young men. If you look at who's committing the crime in that society, it's inevitably going to be sort of men aged, say, roughly 15 to maybe 24. Even things like so this is just in the U.S. context, likelihood of being hospitalized for punching walls. There was a nice graph I saw, and I posted it online, of the sort of the distribution of young or men, just men in general, being hospitalized for, and it's all concentrated again 15 to 24. It's like 10-year-olds aren't being hospitalized for punching walls, and neither are 60-year-olds. It's all that sort of young male group, and I'll admit I've punched walls before.
Yeah. Did you see Alexander Datesyk posted tweeted an image this morning that was a mother asking how she could help her son, and it was just a photo of his bedroom wall, and this bedroom wall was just hole after hole after hole, and then the door had a hole in it. And it's like, I mean, it looked like a sufficiently flimsy American house that the hospitalization risk was quite low, but that the decorating risk might be quite high.
Yeah. That's in that case. I mean, that sounds like it would require some serious
intervention,
intervention, some serious treatment. What I find interesting is, especially for young men, this is, I think, an expression of the young male syndrome, is when a young man.
I don't like that they call it young male syndrome. We can't accept that puberty's effects on a young man is so pronounced that we probably as a society way long ago had, mechanisms in place to tame that fire that grows within. Obviously, we don't go on conquest anymore. Obviously, we don't have rituals anymore, and we don't have coming of age celebrations anymore or trials for men to undergo to place themselves amongst the men. A boy arrives into manhood. That stuff is all gone. Nor are we physical like we used to be. So much like how you have a dog that may misbehave in the house and chew up couches and whatnot because the energy of the dog isn't being managed properly. I think the energy of a young boy, a teenager, isn't managed properly at all in society today. I think they're neglected. I think neglecting our teenage boys is why we have, unfortunate to say, but mass tragedies happen in schools and whatnot with weapons, why we have fights, why walls get punched, why men end up falling, young men, end up falling to gangs, to criminal lifestyles and violence in general, is because they're looking to belong. They're looking to prove themselves. And for example, when your father's not around or you live in a bad neighborhood and you need to protect yourself or your family, men will typically gather, young boys, I keep saying men, teenage boys will go to the gang on the street that will provide them with an outlet to prove themselves, a brotherhood, and protection for their family. Now, that's done in a twisted way that destroys the community around you, but that outlet exists when others don't. Calling it a syndrome, I think, is just part of the 21st century woke indoctrination of labeling something that's completely natural, yet seeing it as deficient simply because males have it. Imagine saying to women that they have a syndrome for simply going through the teenage years where they may become sexually promiscuous, where they may start rebelling against authority in some fashion that's very specific to females, yada, 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 right? Imagine that. But we won't. It's just simply seen as empowerment and growing up and going against the system and authority. And that's how we frame that message. But when it's a boy, it's a syndrome. It's something that needs to be fixed in modern civilized society today. That's my take on it. And if we had those things in place, the coming of age rituals, the boys needing to prove themselves into manhood, mentorship, and just society being structured in a way where a young man can channel all that masculine energy into something positive, would probably completely destroy this whole syndrome narrative.
Experience some sort of usually like a minor injury, and then their immediate response is to lash out. So like I saw this with some of my friends where, like maybe I know something simple like they accidentally poke themselves in the hand or something, and then their immediate response is to punch something. So they hurt themselves and they're pissed, and then they punch something. And I think that this is basically a misfiring of this kind of evolutionary impulse of
No, see, we're going a little too deep. This is young men being raised without proper tools for emotional management. This is what happens when we've lost our way of manhood. This is why masculinity is, quote, under attack or damn near almost extinct, because men used to be able to manage emotions. Men used to have outlets. Men were taught from a very young age as boys had to channel feelings and use them productively, mostly physical, because we are physical beings on this side of the aisle. We learn by doing, by touching, by breaking apart and putting back together. We're a very physical gender that learns with our hands, and we always come to, how could you say, life-changing realizations or insights of the world itself and its workings through physical endeavors. Climbing a mountain clears your mind. Therefore, you have a groundbreaking advancement of, say, the world, yourself, and your place in it. A lot of our insights that we have made as a people, as a society, as a culture, as a race has happened because a man's physical hardship and suffering is linked inexorably to enlightenment. Now that's lost in the world today. So if we're going to go to the nature versus nurture argument of this, I think this is far more nurture than it is nature.
If an intentional agent hurts you, it actually is advantageous to fight back, right?
And a response,
right? Exactly. So if I don't know, like the cactus plant stabs me, maybe punching the wall is unwise. But if you do something to upset me, and then I immediately respond physically, that can actually be an adaptive strategy. So I think like that is, this is speculation, but this is what I think is going on there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense, right? Mm-hmm. You're injured. Let me break my hand now. Right? It makes no sense.
It's poor emotional regulation that should have been nurtured into a young male who, when neglected, especially in modern society today, unleashes it in all sorts of directions in a negative manner, like I ran into a cactus and then I punched it because I got pissed. I doubt that would have been the response 100, 200 years ago, or even back when we were cavemen. It's only a response today because of the neglect that young boys face as they're growing up, the disconnect. Not being nurtured in the correct fashion, not having their brains being stimulated in the manner that's needed to grow into a well-mannered adult male.
That's so. So the young male syndrome, sort of reduced inhibition, increased risk-taking, criminality, risky driving. If you look at who's arrested for drinking and driving, who gets into the most auto accidents, who is the most likely to be killed simply crossing the street. Yeah, so I think it's men are twice as likely to be killed simply crossing the street as women. So there are so many sort of different factors here. And there was actually one on the seatbelt point. There was an interesting study which found that men are less likely to wear seatbelts when they're accompanied by a male passenger relative to when they're sitting by themselves or when they're sitting with a woman.
What do you think that's saying?
I think that is one possibility here is essentially the attempt to signal toughness. That you of course, like there's a lot of interesting work here and a lot of discussion and debate around this, because of course men want to signal to women, and we want to signal that we're strong and can acquire resources and all those kinds of sort of bedrock findings in evolutionary psychology. But then we also want to impress other men too. You want to show that you would be in the ancestral context, you want to show that you would be good in a violent conflict against a rival
strong
coalition,
compatriot.
Or if you're big game hunting, you want to show that you're strong. And so I think the way that it might manifest itself in the modern age is I don't need to wear a seatbelt. I'm going to show my friends and my mates like I don't need to wear this.
That 2-ton rocket ship going towards me hasn't got shit.
Yeah.
We both became fans of that David Putt study.
Oh yeah,
that was able to predict the number of sexual partners based on not female ratings of attractiveness of male faces, but other male ratings of toughness of the same male faces.
Super cool study. Yeah.
That the women's attractiveness rating had basically zero predictive power, but that the man's toughness rating had like quite a good bit of predictive power.
Yeah.
Was it you that taught me, or was it Dunbar that taught me about men's street crossing in the presence or without the presence of women?
That was probably Dunbar.
Right, okay. So this study is so much fun. So they got crossing the street is really interesting because it's a relatively discrete variable. You have distance of vehicle from street crossing, and then you have like the presence or lack of presence of a female. And men, the difference in how close the vehicles would get, and men were prepared to cross the street in the presence of a woman was like a third of what it was when there was no women around. Like, look at all of this, surplus fitness that I have. I'm going to cross the street while this car's only 15 yards away from me, or whatever.
Yeah. All that. I think, the young male syndrome is.
It's the predictive thing. I just had a thought about why women's attractiveness rating had no predictive value. I would guess that, imagine during the tribal days, and this happens still in society today at a much larger scale, but men assign other men rank in a tribe. Therefore, the highest ranked male is seen as the most valuable in a woman's eyes. So if we are 6 men at a table with 6 women, of course the men are leading the tribe. And of course, because of, the way we're built for teamwork and all that, we assign males a hierarchy based on how capable they are. Now, if one of us in the 6 is extremely capable, good leader, willing to lay down their life for all of us, we assign him the alpha male role, which gives him access to all the females. They instantly rate him as the highest value simply because the other men rated him as the highest value, because men hold the power ultimately. And that's a very reductionist take on this, but fundamentally, this is probably what's happening everywhere, because we always have these funny conversations that in society, jokes like women don't even know what women want. Women can't even decide what they want to eat. Now, if you apply that to thousands of years of sexual selection and then intersexual dynamics and then power struggles between male and female, because we're dimorphic, men hold the power. I mean, you can force yourself onto. Imagine caveman days. There wasn't much negotiation going on, or when we came down from the trees and started walking in the savannas, if that's the one you want to believe. But what choice was there back then, aside from males fighting each other for dominance hierarchies that were being built to facilitate survival, which in turn gave access to the select few at the top to most of the other women, either through force by submitting all the other males, or as society or culture became more advanced through selection, voting in the most capable, or simply getting that position by seniority, like the elder. It just, I don't know, it makes sense. When you reduce down the fact that we're just mere animals and that we don't behave much different from other apes, apart from, civilization and all its intricacies, the baseline of everything that we do day to day is always for finding a mate, always for sex, always for food, always for shelter. It's all the same. It's just complexities added on top that we call civilization. But baseline, why we act the way we do, is for those very simple fundamental needs of an organism. So when you go look at something like attraction, having said everything before, it makes sense why women can't really pick, and it doesn't matter, because they like what the group deems is the most valuable. And who gives value to things? Men assign it. Why? Because they're the more powerful ones. It wouldn't mean anything for women to get together and assign value when the other half could come in, club them over the head, and just take anything anyway. So yeah, in a roundabout way, it makes sense when a man can look at another man and go, he's tougher. He could probably take me. That guy looks like he's been through some shit. That guy looks experienced. And then other men say the same thing. And weirdly enough, all women look at that guy and instinctually agree that, yeah, he looks like the most capable. Because a man would be a good judge of character for another man's capability. Likewise, that derives down to the woman. Interesting. Certainly is interesting. I like videos like this. Makes you think. It's a little bit of a nuanced take on everything. Of course, everything is speculation, but as a man growing up in the modern world and being introspective about deeper wants and needs and why we do what we do, why you do what you do as a man, your place in the world, how we look at things like blood sport and war, guns, how violent we are intrinsically as a human being, and how society is designed with rules on top to suppress it ultimately. It's very interesting, man.
Yeah, I think it sort of depends on the context, but yeah, it is most likely to sort of be expressed when you're trying to impress women or when you're trying to impress men. Yeah, again, so I don't think it would necessarily impress young women, that you're driving without a seatbelt, right? And I think maybe on some level guys understand that, but with it wouldn't necessarily. It's not so much that you're impressing your friend when you don't wear the seatbelt. It's that if you do, you might be mocked or made fun of, or that what are you wearing a seatbelt for? That kind of, especially like 19-year-old guys, that kind of thing. And so it's not so much trying to look tough, but just not to look weak.
Very interesting. Okay, so But young male syndrome specifically seems to be worsened amongst sexless, dispossessed, rambunctious young guys coalitioning together in small groups to go and set shit on fire and push over granny.
Yeah. And that's it's, you know, when a young man is isolated sort of by himself, there's only so much damage he can do, but it's sort of the risk becomes exponentially greater sort of as he sort of partners with other men and they collaborate and start to plan. And so this is so you had this interesting.
And those at the top know this. This is why men's only spaces or forums online or wherever a community sprouts up where it's men only and there's a couple guys in there that are obviously going through a rage period or making a joke or saying anything violent in nature that they have no intention of acting upon, immediately it gets shut down. Have you noticed that male spaces, anywhere men get together to have a conversation, it gets buried on the internet? Not only buried, but deleted, suppressed, outright. I'm telling you, the reason why you can go on any female forum and just watch them absolutely be so misandrous that it's shocking what they're saying on there. And nobody bats an eye is because there's no physical threat there. There's no actionable threat there from a bunch of women complaining to one another. But you get a bunch of these guys together complaining, and then somebody makes a joke about something, it's deemed an actionable threat anyways because there is the potential that the guy will act. You see, it's only when you act that they look your way. It's only when they know that there are actions behind your words or potential that they'll actually do something about it. The only reason they allow some of these conversations to happen online, some of the culture wars, all the rot of tribalism and everything we're going through today is because there's no action behind any of it. It doesn't actually matter. But when you start pointing the finger and the direction starts looking upwards at the people making the rules, at the legislations, the bills, and who's passing them, when you start to form a target, that's when you will disappear. Now, you can bitch about the government all you want. It's cool. As long as you do nothing, nothing will happen. Nobody's going to silence you. But the moment you start talking about let's get together, let's protest on 7th Street. Hey, let's form a coalition and go vote and go do stuff and go to City Hall and sit in on town halls and voice our disapproval in front of the White House, yada, yada, yada. Say goodbye to your ass.
In terms about the sedation,
male sedation hypothesis. Yeah, it's in a study at the moment with Buss and William. They're testing it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, because I remember when you first told me about that, something that had come to mind is, I had friends. I mean, this is sort of back in the day. I don't know if people still play this game, World of Warcraft, but I remember I had a couple of friends who lost years of their life to this game, and they were like. And they the way that they spoke, as when you told me about this, I thought yeah, these young guys, this was 18, 19, this was years ago, but they would say all right, I gotta hop off the phone. I'm going on a raid. I got a raid scheduled. Well, you don't have a raid scheduled. You have 7 hours of sitting in your laptop chair.
Computer game scheduled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in his mind, he's like, I'm going with my other internet friends, and we're gonna go, raid this castle or whatever they do in this game. And I could see that, this is a sort of an expression of that, or an example of that, of just young guys who ordinarily might be out causing trouble, and instead they're just online, and that's how they do it. I saw this funny post on Twitter. And this guy, he said something about, back in the day, if you were a hyper curious young man, you'd basically start trying to document the visible differences between the mushrooms right around your house. And today what they do is try to collect all the rings in a Sonic game, speed runs. And so, I think the virtual world is sucking in a lot of angry and aggressive men, but we may also be losing that sort of the pattern matching, sort of systematizing.
Absolutely.
Young men too.
Yeah. Well, it's managed to hijack an awful lot of the status-seeking, coalitional, curiosity, adventurous behavior that young men, throughout all of history has been kind of acclaimed for. You look at my favorite example of the solution for young male syndrome was Portugal in the 1800s.
What did they do there?
The first son was allowed to, there was an imbalance in the sex ratio.
Okay.
And they knew that if son 1 married, because he was the oldest son, but son 2, 3, and 4 perhaps weren't permitted to marry, and there weren't enough women to marry, that this was going to cause problems. So they just put them on galleon ships and said, go, pioneer the new world. Away you go. So they literally exported the young male problem by putting the men on ships and giving them this sense of adventure, channeling their aggression outward against either a new world or political enemies or whatever it was. And I think that there is still a question. Vincent came on the show, a mutual friend came on, and he's been researching, and he says, every single time that we have high rates of sexlessness and blah, 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 we have an increase in associated violence. And it's just at the moment, and someone may tell me that I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to be there in the data, right? We have incel, black pill ideology. There was this period maybe about 2 years ago where they were even claimed to be a domestic terror threat, I think, incels. Right. They were a terrorist group, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
Where's show me the violence, show me the uptick in the violence. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been an uptick in murders and stuff, but I think a lot of that can be attributed to
something else.
Yeah, exactly, like the receding of police from inner cities.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if so on its face it seems silly, right? That the incels is a domestic terror threat, but I wonder if they were just if they were actually familiar with the research on the young male syndrome and the sort of historical I mean, maybe I'm giving them too much credit.
I think
but they were sort of anticipating the possibility, and they're just sort of getting out ahead of it and saying, well, you have a lot of young, sexless, angry young men, and historically that's been a group that's been dangerous. So let's just designate that label on them. But I think, in the modern age with technology, with video games, with porn, with scrolling phones, I mean, I've seen sort of research on what young men, like jobless young men do. And most of the time they're scrolling their phones, playing computer games, watching porn, overeating junk food.
Yeah, I think we solve the mass destabilization that happens from these groups swelling up from being in situations like this because of the amount of distractions we have in society today. Yeah, you could turn to video games, you could turn to porn, you could turn to movies, anime, whatever it is, drugs, anything. Anything is available at your fingertips. Quite literally, you could just order stuff online and have it show up. And the complexity of games today can really suck you in and turn it into a second life, a digital world that you live in. So we solve that danger with the sheer amount of distractions available at your fingertips. Catch-22, because it puts these men in a state of limbo. They're never progressing in life. So the hole that they're digging themselves in as time progresses and they get older and run out of said time, eventually they'll wake up and see that they've actually earned nothing in the real world, that there's nothing to really be proud of, that you threw a lifetime away to your vices, essentially, a coping mechanism for your standing in life that you didn't go and attempt to conquer in some modern way. Because obviously you're not getting put on a boat, bro, to go to war and pillage and build new nations, right? You're not doing this for the queen and the king. You could only do this for yourself.
Food.
You see Nicholas Eberstadt's work on that?
I haven't. Is this related to the men without
men not working or whatever it is, whatever his book was called? Yeah. Just awesome. But it's some insane percentage of men are NEETs, not in education, employment, or training, but also our prime working age. I think it's 22 to 50, and it's this unseen, because unemployment rates are relatively low in America, but hiding in that data is a very unusual cohort of men who are electing to be unemployed. Yeah. They're living on social welfare in one form or another, or still living at home, spending an insane amount of hours per year playing video games. And while they're playing video games, 50% of that time is either on prescription medication or whilst taking weed. So you just have it's like, okay, here's the big data. Okay, well, what's that? Like, how's this constituted? Who are the component people that make up this data? And you go, hang on a second, like, what's this chunk? It's like, I think it's like 8 million or 14 million men, prime working age men, electing to retreat from the employment market. Now, we put this episode up, and a lot of guys that are maybe a part of this cohort, are tangential to this cohort, commented. And, the sentiment very strongly was, why should I contribute to a world which doesn't value me? Why am I going to work to get a 5'3", 210-pound woman who's already gone through 2 marriages and got 4 kids? Just very despondent, evidently, guys who don't see much future for themselves. Yeah. And it was really eye-opening, because largely the comments on Modern Wisdom tend to be pretty personal growthy, agentic, highly sovereign, upwardly mobile, etc. But this episode like blasted out of the algorithm into the wider internet, or maybe it got shared on some forums or whatever. And it was very, very interesting. And I got to see I got a window into this world, and these guys didn't seem very happy.
Yeah.
They were maybe comfortable in their nihilism, but I don't think that they were particularly fulfilled.
I mean, they may be comfortable when they're young, but I'd be curious whether sort of as we move forward, decade or 2 decades later. I mean, it's one thing to be a NEET when you're 19 or 23, but when you're 43 or 51 and you're single, maybe you've never had a girlfriend and you've spent most of the last, several decades just playing video games and
wallowing in collective misery on forums and stuff.
Yeah, I think I mean, now in the modern age, we have so much freedom. You don't have to work anymore. You don't have, if you don't want to, or if you live in a modern rich society, you can collect sort of extended unemployment or maybe live with your parents or find ways to, very few people now, very few young men are sort of literally starving or having to steal food to survive. And now if you want to do something difficult, you have to make the choice to do it rather than sort of be pressured sort of by external factors. I saw this TikTok video. I'm not on TikTok, but people sometimes send these to me. And I saw this one. This young guy. I think he was in the Army, U.S. Army, and he was just sort of walking through his barracks, and he was asking these other young guys, these young recruits, if you could talk to your recruiter right now, what would you say? And these other young guys were like, I told him to go fuck himself, or like, God, this sucks, or why did I do this, so on and so forth. And I'm watching this, I'm like, I know exactly what he's talking about because I was there. I was, I'd enlisted.
You were Air Force, right?
I was in the Air Force, and I remember, especially like the first 2 years are just awful. Like once you get a bit of rank and a bit of responsibility, like once you go through the training perk,
stop eating shit.
Yeah, exactly. Then you're like, then you're okay. But the first couple of years really suck. And so I knew like these were all very young guys. They were still sleeping in bunk beds, and I would have said the same thing, I'm glad that TikTok didn't exist back then, but I'm watching this and I'm thinking like, these guys don't understand, right? In 5 years from now, they're going to be glad that they ate shit for however many years and they went through this experience. And I think a lot of young guys won't even go that far. Like they won't even enlist, which is fine. Everyone has their own sort of make your own choices. But in that moment, I understood that like, this sucks. Why did I do this? Like, this is awful. And then you go through it and you can sort of, in hindsight, go back and say, like, it was a character forming experience. It was good for me. Like, I was an idiot when I was 19 and I probably needed a bit of that structure or a bit of that discipline. I needed to have my ass kicked a little bit. And I think, like you don't, but, and those guys volunteer to do that, right? You have to choose to undergo that experience.
So you've already pre-selected for someone who's got the agency to get moving.
See what some of the comments say. I used to be one of those guys on World of Warcraft for years, and I can say the reason why people love it so much is because it gives you excitement, joy, and a sense of accomplishment that is lacking in real life, where inside of a video game you feel like you're somebody important. Then on the outside world, you're just Bob who works at a job that means nothing. And that's the double-edged sword I tell you about, because the more time you spend in your fake world, the more you will be stuck as Bob who works at a job that means nothing. You have to treat your life like World of Warcraft. The hours you put in leveling up your character, developing trees, finding the loot, all that shit, you have to do in the real world. Unfortunately, in the real world, it takes longer. It takes years instead of 12 hours nonstop to get a legendary drop or fighting that boss because you went up 20 levels. No, this takes time in the real world. Unfortunately, when you play games like this, you lose your ability to chase long-term goals and persevere through obstacles and setbacks. And that's the issue, because you become a quitter, ironically, where it counts. So then when things get hard in the real world, you start to go deeper and deeper and deeper and regress into the digital one because it's easier to succeed there. And quitting in the fake world, the digital life, is just restart game or spawning back at the point where you get to try again where you're at. Instead of, hey, you started a business, it failed, you might have lost everything, and now you need to think of a solution to start again. That's what's unfortunate. This one's interesting. I'm in my early 20s and healthy, but because of a genetic thing, I had sleep apnea and didn't know. I got the breathing machine and gained 15, 20 pounds of muscle and got more shredded despite being heavier. Then it broke for a while and I lost weight while getting chubbier. The changes were stark. It was very eye-opening. I never got blood work done, but I have to assume it made a huge impact on my hormones. I noticed a lot of my peers have abysmal sleep habits. For every 10 people I'd meet, I guess only 1 or 2 have a good circadian rhythm. I bet that has a bigger impact than most would think on the global testosterone declines. I think that's probably hitting on a thread that's not going to get unwound anytime soon by science, and we're probably barely there, starting to learn just the importance of a good circadian rhythm on the body in totality. Something interesting for guys here that are getting terrible sleep. I thought about getting a CPAP machine. Is that what it's called, right? CPAP? Something like that. I've seen it on multiple podcasts where people were talking about hooking yourself up to that and getting oxygenated the right way and it changing everything completely. I mean, just imagine the importance of oxygen and regular uptake while you're asleep. Who knows, man, how crazy the body is. The lack of initiation rites means young lads try to prove themselves in different, possibly more violent, pathological ways. Also just feeling like a caged animal in school or stuck in their room. I know that feeling, dude, when you're just getting lectured to death and you want nothing more than, like, you can't even sit in your seat. You can't sit still. Can we just go out and do something? I could even learn much better if we were walking around on a parkway, something, while you give this lecture. I'd be more in tune with those words by simply moving and talking than sitting in my seat, bored to death. Thankfully, I didn't get put on Ritalin or any of that stupid shit. There needs to be better options, as there were traditionally, of lads going into the army or community service or monasteries to discipline their aggressive instincts. Otherwise, it has a very detrimental effect on society. Yeah, we need to separate boys and girls schools. I'm convinced that coeducation is a massive failure. I'm convinced that if you separate boys and girls out, you can develop curriculums that are tailored to the gender, where each one gets the best possible education in which their mind is perfectly tuned for. We don't, though. We have this race to the bottom. What's the cheapest option? Throw them all together, put 30 students to one teacher, sit up there and lecture them to death on PowerPoints, and then test them with A, B, C, D answers where they don't even have to explain how they arrive there. There's no critical thinking. It's all memorization. It's all just churning out drones that know how to pull a lever and push a button, and that's it. That's all you're good for in society. And then we wonder why IQ is dropping. We wonder why people aren't learning shit. We wonder why the people graduating out of college or high school have reading levels multiple grades below what they should be at. Not a surprise, man. Our system isn't designed to actually bring you up. It's just designed to turn you into a bot so you can do a simple job that makes somebody else rich. That's what it is. Anyways, interesting episode today, guys. Happy New Year's. See you on the next one. Hey, everyone. If you have a minute, please head over to legionofmen.store and grab yourself some cool merch as well. We have a bunch of limited edition designs, brand new stuff on the way, and all the proceeds go to supporting the channel. We don't want to be sponsored by corporations where we have to submit videos for review, have our speech impeded, or push any products that we don't use. So thank you so much to everybody that goes into the shop. Again, it's legionofmen.store. I'll put it up here for you guys. First-time customers get a 10% off, and we have a bunch of great designs by artists from the community that watch the channel and support. They get proceeds as well, a percentage of everything that gets sold. So community funded through and through. Again, appreciate you guys.